ابن محمد لبيس قال الجيش تبع اليهود قال روحوا استلموا كابونات. هذا اول مره ما صدق انهم لانهم محتلين، يعني ما ناخذش منهم دقيقه على بعض لانهم عدوين. رحنا على اساس يعطونا الكرتونه باحترامنا بادب، طلعوا اوسخ من الاوسخين. ضلنا من 7 بالليل لحد الفجر. الدبابات من هنا، البحر من هنا، اليهود من هنا، القوات من هنا، الاباتش من هنا. منو بدك تتلقاها؟ شوفوا يا دول الاوروبيه شوفونا، شوفوا يا دول العربيه شوفونا. يا عمي ننزل، احنا بلد من زيكم، لو مش زيكم هاليوم عمري ما عرفتش من وين طريق، ولا بنعرف اكل ولا شرب. يعني احنا شعب غزه صامد ليوم الدين. واقول للجيش الاسرائيلي ما تقدر على شعب غزه، شعب غزه قوتوا بالله، انتوا قوتكم بالسلاح، احنا قوتنا بالله. احنا شعب عظيم، بس نعمل كل بني ادم لكل غزه منحوس لانه محتل كذاب. هذا الصحابه اللي زيكم نزلوا. احنا شعب عظيم، نقول للشباب ما يروحوش لان عن ابوها الكون ولا تيجي منهم ظلم. يا تيجي باحترام يا بلاش. هاي امر واحد. وقبل اخوي فات الحرب راح، والله يعلم مين بده يروح. الحين مش ضامنين ارواحنا. بس كل امريكان وكل دول عربيه، احنا يا عم ما بننزلش من الله بنفهم قناتنا. تفتحوا لنا المعبر حياكم الله، بدناش الروحه تبعتكم. يا الله يخلف عليكم. بتكون ماشي على الخط زي ما بيقولوا لك كذابين، ماشيين على الخط تلاقي اللي جنبك بيموت، واللي او الامك بتموت، الاخوك بتموت. يا راجل اذا الدكتور مش مسموح له يموت تموت. الدنيا والله وانا الخاص لهالدرجه هذه. بس غير يا راجل امي فقدت اخويا باليوم. اليوم انا مش ملاقيين الناس، هذا الشعب كله جايب تحولوا، مش لاقيين لقمه ياكلوها يا راجل. مش عارفين. رحنا على الكويت، رحنا على مستشفى ناصر، رحنا على الصليب، رحنا على الابطاني، وين ما تتخيل. هاي الشنطه وهاي كيسك صحيح، هاي كيسك، هاي كيسين، واحد لابوي وواحد لي. هاي ولا ماسكين اي شيء ولا مسدس ولا رايحين كاتب. مدنيين احنا مش عساكر، احنا مدنيين مش عساكر. لو بقول لك والله ما يروح. نصيحتي يا عم اللي بده يفقد اخوه حرام يروح، عشان كونه بتسواش 50 شيكل. والله حرام نروح ونضحي بارواحنا. العربيه شوفونا يا عم ننزل، احنا بلد من زيكم، لو مش زيكم هاليوم عمري ما عرفتش من وين طريق، ولا بنعرف اكل ولا شرب. يعني احنا شعب غزه صامد ليوم الدين. واقول للجيش الاسرائيلي ما تقدر على شعب غزه، شعب غزه قوتوا بالله، انتوا قوتكم بالسلاح، احنا قوتنا بالله. وما علمتنا قالت لليهود يا ما عملوش شيء، احنا العو منهم. لما خشين عليهم بالسياج زي هيك، خشين عليهم قوه باحتراق عليهم، ما قدرونا. احنا شعب عظيم، بس نعمل كل بني ادم لكل غزه منحوس لانه محتل كذاب. هذا الصحابه اللي زيكم نزلوا، وحماس نزلت، الاخوه كلها نزلت، كل العربيه ما حدش رد عليهم. الان توجهوا العصابات. الان وين غزه؟ بالشمال، الجنوب، وسط القطاع، وين ما تتخيل محاصره غزه. بس قوتهم ما يقدرونا. احنا شعب عظيم، نقول للشباب ما يروحوش لان عن ابوها الكون ولا تيجي منهم ظلم. يا بتيجي باحترام يا بلاش. هاي امر واحد. وقبل اخوي فات الحرب راح، والله يعلم مين بده يروح. الحين مش ضامنين ارواحنا. بس اقول لامريكان وكل دول عربيه، احنا يا عم ما بننزلش من الله بنفهم قناتنا. تفتحوا لنا المعبر حياكم الله، بدناش الروحه تبعتكم. يا الله يخلف عليكم. بتكون ماشي على الخط زي ما بيقولوا لك كذابين، ماشيين على الخط تلاقي اللي جنبك بيموت، واللي او الامك بتموت، الاخوك بتموت. يا راجل اذا الدكتور مش مسموح له يموت تموت. الصليب يا راجل بيقصبوهم. بيقصبوا ايش اقول لك؟ الاسعافات تاعون الدفاع المدني ما بخلوش ايش الا يقصبوه. هذا وين؟ والله وانتم والله لو ايش لو بمكان واحد رمينا عليهم صاروخ لا يقلب الدنيا. والله وانا الخاص لهالدرجه هذه. الاسرائيل يا راجل لا يموت منهم كلب، يا راجل لا يعمل الدنيا فوضى.
احمد انت فقدت حدا اليوم؟
ايش اللي خلاك تروح؟ امي فقدت اخويا باليوم. اليوم مش ملاقيين الناس، هذا الشعب كله شايف تحولوا، مش لاقيين لقمه ياكلوها يا راجل. وين؟ والله ربنا ما قال ارحمكم الارض يرحمكم السماء. حمونا بالارض ويرحمكم بالسماء.
طمنت على امك ولا لسه؟
لسه مش عارفين. رحنا على الكويت، رحنا على مستشفى ناصر، رحنا على رحنا على الابرطاني. وين ما تتخيل لما بقول لك تصير هدنه قبل ما تصير بيوم بقتلوا ولا مليون من الشعب. مش من حقنا نعيش زي الناس، زي دول الأوروبية، زي دول العربية.
احمد احكي لي ايش صار معكم من اول ما بلش اطلاق النار؟
طلعنا من الوحدة بالليل، امي طلعت من 8. ابوي ايش قال له امي؟ قال لها يا بنت خليكم ما بدناش نروح. قالت له لا امي يا ابو نبيل ما فيش حدا نطلع من البلاد. رحنا توجهنا من خان يونس لرفح، هذا امي على 8 وسط العلم، دوار العلم تاع رفح. ابوي لحقه على الوحدة بالليل. هاي الشنطة وهالكيس الصحي. هاي الكيسين، واحد لابوي وواحد لي. هاي ولا مسكين اي شيء ولا مسدس ولا رايحين كده. مدنيين احنا مش عساكر، احنا مدنيين مش عساكر. لو بقول لك عسكري ليش تضربوا يعني انتوا زلتكم تعملوا لاولادكم هيك؟ انتوا يا راجل بحلى احتراف تعملوه.
طيب
لما وصلنا كنا قاعدين، صارت اطلاق نار تتوجه بالحامة، مش عارفين ايش يعني. ما كنا اولاد المدنيين، ما فيش حدا عسكر راح هناك ولا توجه لهم بخدش. صاروا يطبوا مش عارفين ايش. امي توجهت للعلم، هذا على 2 بالليل وصلت، على 3 استشهدت. ابويا الحين بزعل اخوي عبد الرحمن، بزعل يا عبد الرحمن ما رد علي. احساس امي مستشهده يا اخوي اي واحد، بس ما حدا رد، ما حدا قال نعم، ما حدا عمل اي شيء. يعني الحين خاطرين نطلع في نفس عينك كل واحد يحط له ابوه بنفس بتاعت رفح بندور عليهم مش لاقيهم. وين الدول العربيه تسمعنا يا عم؟ نطلع صوتنا لدول العربيه، لدول المسلمين. على العرب وعلى العرب واحنا المسلمين واحنا بيحكوا فينا وما بيسووناش شيء. واحنا العرب يا شباب يا عرب اطلعوا لنا يا عرب. انا ما احنا بدنا مسؤول في كل رئيس يطلع قدنا. بدنا عربية، بدنا عربية، بدنا عرب. وانا العرب قولي له انا العرب. يا راجل منتخب حقها. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل عنده العربي بنتخب. حسبي الله اخت شهيد وما ادريش حاجه. وانا العرب وانا
The Arab leaders are nothing but Zionist pawns, and I can prove it to you in just a few seconds. Over the course of Donald Trump's election in 2024, the Israel lobby spent $232 million on his campaign in the form of lobbying. Now, Donald Trump took a 3-country tour to the Middle East this week. He went to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Now, these countries have more money than Israel could ever dream of, and a lot of people assumed that the leaders of these countries would use that money to lobby Donald Trump to end the G-side in Gaza, or at least get a ceasefire. But what happened shocked many, myself included. These leaders spent more money than Israel could ever offer to Donald Trump. Saudi Arabia, $600 billion in investments in the United States. Qatar, $200 billion in investments in the United States, and a $400 million private jet for Donald Trump, much more than the $232 million that Israel spent on his campaign in 2024. But all for what? That's the question. These leaders, the Gulf state leaders, reportedly only asked that Donald Trump allow for some aid and some food into Gaza. Not a ceasefire, not an end to the G-side. These leaders don't care about much more than lining their own pockets, making them and their royal families just a little bit richer, and closer alignment with the United States, with the U.S. empire. They don't care about ending the G-side. Do you really believe that Yemen would have made a deal like this? Do you really believe that Yemen would have given Donald Trump $600 billion and asked for nothing in return for the people of Gaza? You got to be kidding me. This is the biggest political failure I have ever seen from these Gulf leaders and their so-called pursuit to ease the plight to the Palestinian people. They did nothing but reward the same exact country that is causing the pain, suffering, bloodshed, and loss of life for the people in Gaza each and every day.
Free Palestine is just today's version of Heil Hitler. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want to destroy
Free Palestine,
the Jewish state.
Free Palestine, Free Palestine. And if you want to say that I'm saying, say it to my face, BB, and you won't walk away from that confrontation. Free Palestine is the most honorable expression of humanity that exists in the world today. It does not mean that you tolerate terrorism. It does not mean that you are a proponent of violence. What it means is that the Palestinian people have an inherent right to enjoy the dignity and freedom and sovereignty as every other human being on this planet, free of the occupation of Israel, free of the genocide of Israel, free from seeing their children burned to death in front of them. That is what Free Palestine stands for, and I will shout it out as loud as I can, whenever I can, forever, until there is a free Palestine. But I won't tolerate Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, he embarrassed every Jew in the world when he said that. This man disgraced the Holocaust, disgraced the memory, but he's done it forever. You know, The Holocaust has become an industry for Israel, not a cause, not something to be mourned.
Free Palestine is just today's version.
America's dedication to recognizing Israel as an independent country is just a way to launder U.S. violence. Israel is just the 51st state of America, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Between October 2023 and September 2024, Israel got more federal funding than fucking New Jersey. In that same time period, Israel got more federal funding than Utah, New Mexico, and Delaware combined. Israel is closer to Washington, D.C. than fucking Guam. And Guam is a U.S. territory. The creation of Israel is identical to the creation of the United States. Why imperialists commit genocide, steal the land, and then create laws to restrict the movement of the remaining indigenous population. The same way America stole Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California from Mexico and said that Mexicans are illegal, the exact same thing that Israel is doing to Palestinians. Israel is just America expanding its territories into the Middle East. America gives them the majority of their weaponry because Israel is simply a military base for America. Because guess who else buys the majority of their weaponry with US tax dollars? The US military. Israel trains our police officers and ICE agents because they are fundamentally the same institution. ICE, the IOF, American police, and the US military all carry out the same job of oppressing marginalized people and disrupting indigenous populations. That's why the majority of our taxpayer dollars go to funding the fucking military, funding the police, and funding Israel.
You are one of those who supported this, who refused to oppose it, who remained silent about it, who walked by on the other side of the road as the children lay dying. You are damned in this life forever. Your actions or your inaction will hang around your neck like a lead weight, like the proverbial albatross around the neck of the mariner. Forevermore, for the rest of your days. No one will ever allow you to show your face, to make a comment, to condemn anyone for anything without reminding you and everyone who will listen to them that you are complicit in one of the most horrific crimes in modern history. That's how bad it was.
That was a hell of a point, bro. You're like a plane in a movie. Can we get your stance on Palestine?
On Palestine?
On Palestine, yeah.
Delete it.
Delete it. Oh my God, that's actually the most intense stance we've gotten. Sir, why should we delete it? Where are you from, Peter?
I'm from Texas,
You're
sir.
from Texas, Peter? How about we delete Texas, Peter? We give it back to Mexico and we send you on a refugee ship back to Europe.
Man,
how about that?
Sweet?
Coming soon. You're going back on a ship to Europe or whatever. Brain trust. Dude, don't hit me with your fucking flag! Hey, both accusations, hit me with that flag again and see what happens! Don't worry. Do not hit me with that flag! No.
I'll take the video.
Shame on you! In front of children!
I take the video. I take the video.
Check the video! Okay? If we have mutual ancestors,
No,
you should be
never,
ashamed.
never.
Pendant longtemps, j'étais sioniste. Quand j'ai été sioniste, j'ai dit il faut que j'aille vivre en Israël. J'y étais. J'ai vécu là-bas pendant 3 ans comme médecin à Beersheba. Et ça m'a guéri de mon sionisme. Voilà. Parce que les relations humaines là-bas sont désastreuses. Je parle des relations entre juifs. C'est la violence là-bas est à un niveau incroyable. Je ne me suis pas retrouvé là-dedans. Tous les rêves que j'avais, tout mon fantasme d'une société idéale, fraternelle, se sont effondrés. Et comme beaucoup de gens ici présents, nous sommes, le mot bouleversé est peut-être faible, je suis bouleversé par cette barbarie qui semble n'avoir aucune limite. Le massacre de médecins, de journalistes, d'enfants, de vieillards. Tout ça au nom, je suis juif moi-même, et je suis attaché à certains attachements, surtout culturels, à mon judaïsme. Le sionisme s'est constitué sur une forclusion du judaïsme. En fait, ils ont construit une boîte vide dont les parois étaient faites de violence nationale, nationaliste plutôt. Et aujourd'hui, cette forclusion se traduit par ce génocide que l'on fait du peuple palestinien, qui est un peuple frère. Ce sont des êtres humains comme vous et moi. On est dans un infini de barbarie. Pire peut-être que ce que les nazis ont fait. Tout ça est bouleversant, scandaleux. Et surtout, nous ne savons pas quelles vont être les conséquences à moyen terme.
When the Germans marched through Belgium, there was this whole thing of atrocity propaganda taking place where, the Germans were slitting open the bellies of the Belgian women, raping the Belgian nuns, bayoneting the Belgian children. None of it was true. None of it was true. And now the Israelis are out there saying this, that, and the other thing happened. No, ladies and gentlemen, don't believe it. Wait, Scott, I've seen the building with the burned bodies. Yeah, but you know that building was struck by tank fire, not Hamas fire. That the head of security for the largest kibbutz, Be'eri, I think it was, has said that the Israeli IDF came in with tanks and was taking down the building, slaughtering our own people. There's a survivor who said, I was in a house with 20 Jewish hostages, 8 Hamas guys. Hamas guys wanted to surrender. The Israelis hit us with tank fire, killing 8 Hamas guys, 18 Jews. 1 Israeli survivor is wounded. I'm the only one who came out clean. This is the truth. Those kids that were out there in the rave, I say kids, half of them were active duty Israeli, the Defense Force people out there partying. And the other half had just gotten out of the Israeli Defense Force. These are military age people. Many of them were armed. There was a huge crossfire between Israeli security forces and Hamas.
Right. I was going to say that
in the middle, and the vast majority of the people that died that day weren't killed by Hamas. So let's just knock this crap off. Okay, Israel right now is running a huge propaganda exercise trying to win over the world, and it ain't working.
Israeli media sounding the alarm that their hasbara or propaganda is no longer working as the world is talking more about Gaza and less about them, as they fear that the continued genocide could lead to Israel's total isolation from Western countries. And so their answer, instead of stopping the genocide, is to do more propaganda. And they go on to say that the real problem here with Israel's image is not that they're committing war crimes, but they are not doing propaganda well enough after committing the war crime. The article talks about an incident where BBC and Western media outlets were covering the story of Dr. Ala al-Najjar, who had tragically lost 9 out of her 10 children because of Israeli airstrikes. The article goes on to say that when Westerners watch these events in Gaza and do not hear an Israeli spokesperson explaining the context, this causes further erosion in Israel's already shaky standing. Does this article not know what happens when Israeli spokesperson or activists such as this deranged woman, for example, go on Western media to defend their war crimes? They almost always make it 100 times worse than if they never spoke in the first place. A bunch of C-list celebrities have written yet another letter advocating for Israel. The signatories of the letter, which include Miriam Bialik and Deborah Messing, hilariously have named themselves the Creative Community for Peace and calls for the end to, and I quote, the lies designed to demonize Israel and the Jewish people. Which is Hasbara 101, always conflating the Jewish people worldwide with the nation state of Israel. And you know this letter is a response to another letter that was written by a bunch of British celebrities to the UK government barely a week ago or almost a week ago, where they were asking the UK government to stop selling arms to Israel. And while that letter was filled with A-list celebrities as well as iconic figures from the British media such as pop star Dua Lipa, footballing icon Gary Lineker, as well as actor Benedict Cumberbatch, the Israel one is filled with has-beens. Other than Miriam Bialik and Deborah Messing, some of the other signatories include Sharon Osbourne, Jerry O'Connell, Patricia Heaton, and Uzo Aduba. Well done, guys. That'll surely get all the young, progressive Westerners on your side.
Has anything good ever come out of Rafah? Has any prominent person, any inventions, any science, anything relevant, anything important to the world ever come out of Rafah or the Gaza Strip?
The guy that couldn't find Palestine on a map can't find a job. But you know who does have a job? Even in Zionist Hollywood, they don't want anything to do with this oaf. This is further indication that boycotts do work. See, these people are loyal to money. They've abandoned religion. They're Mammonites. They worship greed and money, and they will turn on each other for money. If Zionism becomes unprofitable to them, they will flip on it like that. Maybe you shouldn't have celebrated bombing kids.
Israel is like a lesion or a blister that forms on your skin, and the totality of your sickness that you've been hiding is revealed by that blister appearing. You know, the Jews were hated in Europe, persecuted in Europe for centuries. The Holocaust didn't happen in a vacuum. Hitler and the Nazis were the children of the West. It was a crescendo of anti-Jewish hatred, and Israel is the creation of that hatred, that anti-Jewish hatred. Zionism is the most explicit expression of anti-Jewish hatred that you can imagine. I mean, short of the Holocaust. You know, get the Jews out of Europe, exile them somewhere else. It's exile. It's just another banishment for the Jews. But you can, you get to call it empowerment and so on, make it sound positive, because instead of calling it a banishment, you're calling it returning them to their so-called homeland. But basically, you just want them out. You just want to get them out of your country. It's banishment, it's exile. You know, Zionism was originally funded and supported by some of the worst and most powerful anti-Semites in Europe. So it was created by their hatred. The exile of the Jews was conducted using the logic and the rationale and the mechanisms of racist supremacist colonization, but it was banishment. The dehumanizing, dismissiveness, and contempt for the indigenous people, the Palestinians, that's classic Western colonization. And it's been maintained exclusively by violence and by causing regional instability, which is in and of itself an encapsulation of how the West operates in the world. And then you have the fact that Israel is also an encapsulation or an embodiment or an incarnation of the military-industrial complex. So you have the anti-Semitism, you have the racism, you have the white supremacy, you have the violence, you have the greed, you have the predation, and you have the parasitic character of the West, all summarized, all incarnated in Israel. Israel is like the logo of the West. It's a logo of Western so-called civilization, Western imperialism. It includes every aspect in the entity, the Zionist entity, includes every aspect that you find. It's an expression of every aspect that you find in Western colonization, Western imperialism, and Western so-called civilization. I mean, even down to the fact that it calls itself a democracy in the midst of the so-called despotic Muslim world, despotic Arab world, Joseph Borrell's garden surrounded by a jungle. So yes, Israel, the Western colonizer project that is called Zionism, is all the sickness, it's all the cruelty, it's all the savagery and stupidity of Western so-called civilization boiled down to its impure essence. And that's why you can see that the perpetuation of this project is unraveling the West. Your insistence to maintain this project is destroying your own societies, your own economies. And the tool that you use to rule the world is actually becoming the main source for the alienation and the estrangement of the whole world away from you. The thing that you tried to use as your instrument or your tool, your device for controlling the Middle East, for controlling the Arab world, for controlling basically the global South, because Israel was also historically used to control Africa as well. So this tool that you have employed as an instrument of control has now become an instrument by which you are losing control of everything. Israel is like a leash.
And that's the thing that I don't get about the United States and our policy towards Israel. Okay, if it's such a good idea, why don't we do it here? Let's give the Israelis a homeland here that'll be Jewish only, and if you're not Jewish, you have to get out. And when you put it in those terms, suddenly it becomes maybe not so desirable. And then the other question is, Palestine obviously had nothing to do with the Holocaust. We're obviously doing this in part because of the Holocaust. Well, why don't we put it in Germany then? Why didn't we carve off a chunk of northern Germany and call it New Israel? Hamburg could have become New Jerusalem and just give them northern Germany, right? That only seems fair, especially since most of the Jews that we're talking about were either American Jews, and most of them were of German descent, or they were European Jews, and most of them were of German descent, right? There's a reason why Yiddish was the dominant Jewish language in Europe. Yiddish is just German with a Jewish accent and some Hebrew words. And Yiddish is also an awesome language, by the way. Some of the coolest words ever are Yiddish. But anyway, it's a different story.
Didn't they want to be close to Jerusalem and all that stuff like that?
Okay. But then you say, well, so then it's a religious thing, but most Zionists will go, no, this isn't about religion. And it's like, well, if it's not about religion, then why do you want to be so close to Jerusalem? Clearly it's about religion. But then they say, no, I'm an atheist, or I'm a secularist Jew, and I'm a Zionist. And it's like, well, then why did it have to be Jerusalem? This was our homeland. This was your homeland? You're 2,000 years old? I don't understand. Here's the twist. The majority of Palestinians are of Jewish descent and are ethnically more Jewish than the European and American Jews who went and created Israel. So every time a Palestinian is murdered by an Israeli, a person who's more Jewish is killed by a person who's less Jewish. It's true that the Israeli is actually practicing Judaism or is a secular Jew. And it's true that those Palestinians are Christians and Muslims whose ancestors converted from Judaism to Christianity and Islam. But it's just a weird, ironic twist. I mean, it's embittering how ironic it is. It just doesn't make any sense. And here's the problem. And I don't think I said this plainly last time, so I'll say it, and then I'll let you go because I'm way over. But I'm sorry. Let me just do this. The problem is if you said, okay, we're going to create a new state, and it'll be secular. It's not for one religion anymore. It'll be a democracy, secular, and there'll be rights for all minorities. And by the way, Muammar Gaddafi actually suggested calling it Isratin. Israel and Palestine, Israel. So, it sounds terrible to me, but whatever. I don't care what you want to call this thing. Call it Israel, call it Palestine, call it Israel, call it Israel, Palestine with a hyphenation like your parents did with you. I don't care. Whatever it is that makes you happy. But if you did it, suddenly there'd be 13 million Palestinians who are Christian and Muslim. I think it's like 10% Christian, 90% Muslim. And then there'd be 6 million Jews. So the Jews would become an instant minority in that state. And they don't want that to happen. That's why they're fighting the Palestinians. They're not fighting the Palestinians because the Palestinians are attacking them. The Palestinians aren't attacking them. They're fighting the Palestinians because they don't want to have Palestine integrated with them because they'll instantly lose their majority. There are actually 7 million Palestinians living in Palestine and Israel. But 5 million are confined to the concentration camp that we call the Gaza Strip. It's just a concentration camp. And then the ghetto that we call the West Bank. It's basically a bunch of little ghetto pockets. And so by doing that, what the Israelis have done is they've created a situation where the natives are in internal exile. Right? They're still in Palestine. They're just not in their homes. Their homes are in Haifa or Jaffa or Jerusalem. And so they're displaced inside their own country as a majority, but with no rights to citizenship. This is like the most nasty thing since apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa. It might be worse than apartheid South Africa in some ways. In fact it is, when you think about it, because at least in the case of apartheid Israel, apartheid South Africa, there was no blockade preventing the import and export of goods into the black neighborhoods, right? Because white people were making money off of the black population, so you wouldn't do that. There was the same mass migration effect, 2.5 to 3.5 million. I just realized something. So I even said this in class earlier. So the history I learned was the largest forced mass migration in human history was South Africa, when it became apartheid, forced 2.5 to 3.5 million blacks to move out of white neighborhoods. And by the way, and Asians too. The Indian population was also separated out. Well, the vast majority of the 5 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip and West Bank are themselves refugees forced out of the rest of Palestine. So that's actually probably a bigger population. Because I would be surprised if it was more than 1.5 million people were actually from those two places. I bet 3.5 million are actually displaced refugees. Anyway. It's not the only refugee crisis we have. We also have now the Syrian refugee crisis and Iraqi refugee crisis. Jordan, the last time I checked, and I don't know how accurate these stats are, Jordan is like 25% Jordanian now. It's something like 60% Palestinian, 25% Jordanian, and the remaining 15% are Syrian and Iraqi. I mean, this is incredible.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
I became a very fervent Zionist, and I was for years. What I did not know at the time, of course, is that this Zionist project had been achieved at the cost of the Palestinian population, and that in order to realize their vision of a Jewish state, the Zionists had to quite deliberately go after suppressing the rights, the political rights, the national rights, and ultimately even the physical integrity of the Palestinian nation.
50,000 people have died, 70%.
I found the Palestinians very warm, very welcoming. The first time I was there, I cried every day for 2 weeks. I just cried at what I saw. And this was over 30 years ago now. Now I'm not even talking about present conditions. Because conditions both in the West Bank, not to mention Gaza, has become infinitely worse than they were when I was there the first time. When I see the infants of Gaza being mutilated and bombed and killed, and the conditions they had to endure and the fear that's being inflicted on them and the trauma that they're experiencing. How can I not think of my own experience as an infant in the Second World War? People are people, human beings are human beings, and the never again can't just apply to one people. It needs to apply to everybody universally. And from that point of view, what's happened in Palestine for decades, and especially what's happened in Gaza in the last year and a half, is a complete betrayal of the never again slogan and the ideal behind it. And they're saying they're doing this in the name of the Jewish people. And they're saying that anybody who opposes it, therefore, has to be an anti-Semite. People who oppose the Nazis were called anti-German. Americans who oppose the Vietnam War were called anti-American. So this anti is a repeated litany of anybody who opposes the policies of their state. And this charge of anti-Semitism is simply either wildly mistaken, or in many cases, a completely cynical use of Jewish trauma to justify Palestinian trauma.
We haven't yet actually discussed the origins of Israel and Palestine. Let's discuss the genesis of Israel.
Yeah, so in the aftermath of World War II, the Zionist movement finally had a little bit of legitimacy. So Zionism was born in the end of the 19th century as a result of the Dreyfus Affair. So Dreyfus was a Jewish German officer in the French army. It's a little convoluted. He gets busted by the French for being a spy for Germany. The Jewish population in Europe interpreted that as an attack on a Jewish person. It's just as possible, if not as likely, that it was actually an attack on an ethnic German living in France, right? Yeah, there was probably, I'm not denying that there was anti-Semitism in France, there obviously was, but he was also German, so there was probably also a component of anti-Germanness. The reality was he was scapegoated. He had nothing to do with what he was being charged with. And so Zionists like Herzl are born, the Zionist movement is born, Herzl kind of being the father of it, in the Jewish population. It had already existed as an idea. We described earlier Napoleon wanting to send Jews to Palestine. So the dominant anti-Jewish ideology was originally called Judenhass in Germany, which meant Jew hatred. The problem with the name was it sounds like an emotional thing as opposed to a logical thing. So they coined the phrase anti-Semitism so that they could say, look, it's not that I have an emotion, I disagree with the presence of Jews in Europe. A component of the anti-Semitic movement was we just wanted the Jews to leave. The initial ideology didn't want to kill the Jewish population. Obviously, it morphs into that and turns into the Holocaust. But the original goal wasn't to kill them; it was just to evict them. In the same way that there's a portion of the United States population that wants to evict undocumented immigrants, or that the German population wanted to evict undocumented Polish immigrants, or that the British wanted to evict the Polish immigrants, and that's why they voted for Brexit, right? It's that mentality. And so here are these profoundly racist anti-Semites. They coined the phrase anti-Semitism. The Zionist movement goes, maybe they're right. Maybe we should leave Europe. Maybe we can't make a good life for ourselves here. Herzl wasn't interested initially in Palestine. He was thinking someplace like Uganda. So in a really weird way, what happened was the creation of a population of white Europeans who wanted to conduct a colonial enterprise, not unlike the colonial enterprise that ended up with Argentina and the United States and Canada and Australia, where there would be a population of white people going to another country and ethnically cleansing and genociding the local population to take it from them. Ultimately, the Zionists really just wanted to go to Palestine. The Balfour Declaration sort of reinforces the idea of going to Palestine. Balfour was a British lord who said that's where they should end up. And then World War II happens. Before World War II happens, a lot of Jews decide to do this, and they begin migrating to Palestine. The Palestinian population welcomed them. They saw this as sort of a natural outcome, in part because historically Jews and Muslims and Christians in the Middle East got along. I mean, you have to remember that even during the Crusades, the native Christian population, if it had been open to the Crusader states in the beginning, totally rejected the Crusader states by the end and were siding with their fellow Muslims against the Crusaders, and the Jewish population was always against the Crusaders. There was this history of Muslims knew the Jews were their allies. And so the idea of Jewish Europeans coming to Palestine, the Palestinians welcomed them in. There's account after account after account of Palestinian families letting like Jewish Poles move into their homes and live with them. And then they would do something foolish, like go on vacation and come back. And the Jewish population in the home said, no, this is our home now, and you can't come back into it. And so there was this strange effect of the Palestinians going, yeah, sure, come. The Jewish immigrants to Palestine.
Sorry, this was like 1910, 20s, like
10s, 20s, 30s. Some of them began to do terrorism. And so there were terrorist organizations formed. They began attacking British assets. They attack hotels, British military bases. So there's a violent element to this. There was also an attempt to simply legally purchase land. And the Zionists ended up purchasing somewhere around 5-10% of Palestine legally. And then in the process, there was attempts to create land confiscation, where they would just go onto a piece of land that nobody owned and begin colonizing it. The World War II happens. There's the Holocaust, which is a catastrophic event, and the world becomes open to the idea that, yeah, there needs to be a Jewish state. The irony is if you're going to create the Jewish state, let's do it. So I'm part Austrian. I want to out that because I'm going to suggest the Middle East peace solution. Let's make Austria a new Israel. Hitler was an Austrian. The Germans, Austria is German. They speak German. You can talk to Austrians and go, I'm not German, I'm Austrian, whatever. They're Germans. Germany did the Holocaust. Germany annexed Austria and did the Holocaust. So put Israel in Austria, call it Israel, make the Danube be the boundary between the Austrian area. So instead of calling it the West Bank, you call it the North Bank, right? And put the Austrians there. Vienna will rename it Jerusalem. And then Tyrol, we'll call it the Tyrol Strip. And we'll just shove a bunch of the Austrian population into the North Bank and the Tyrol Strip. But then let's colonize the North Bank and create little walled off sections and ghettoize I think that's the solution, the natural solution. Instead, the world thought, let's do this to Palestine, which is ironic because the Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form. During the war, some Jews from Palestine actually joined a Jewish brigade that fought with the British. The British wouldn't let Palestinians do that because they didn't want Palestinians to have had combat experience. But they did employ Palestinians as stevedores. So Palestinians did serve on the docks loading and unloading ships so that white people could fight the war, because the British were nervous about having brown and black people fight. They did. Brown and black people definitely fought for the British. They were just reluctant. They didn't want anybody getting an idea and leading a rebellion when they went back home to Kenya or South Africa or Palestine. Ironically, the British love to put Gurkhas and Maoris into combat situations, but that's a different story. So in the aftermath of all of this, the UN votes to divide Palestine and create an Israel and a Palestine. The vote for the division gave Israel about 55% of Palestine and gave the Palestinians 45%. So the 55% that was going to go to Israel, that land was to create a Jewish-only state. And then the 45% that was going to go to Palestine would be for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But the problem was that the land didn't belong to the Jewish population, right? Because they bought 5 to 10% of the land. So basically, you're gifting somewhere between 45 and 50% of the land to the Zionist movement. Well, what about the Palestinians already living there? So the Arabs rejected this. The Israelis invaded. They declare their independence. What it is it's a colonial enterprise. They invade and conquer Palestine. There's a war, the 1948 war, and the Egyptian army goes in with rifles that don't work. They had tanks that were profoundly flawed, like tanks that could only turn in one direction, or the turret didn't turn, or the machine gun didn't work. They were mostly, I don't know if they were mostly, but a lot of them were Stuarts, which were these little itty bitty tankettes. The Israelis were better armed, better equipped. They had more combat experience. There was a bunch of them. There was a huge invasion force. The Jordanians made an attempt to stop this. The Syrians fought. There were Iraqi units that showed up as volunteers. Nobody could stop the Israelis from creating the state. By the time they were done, the Israelis ended up with 78% of Palestine. So the UN division of Palestine created 3 Israeli wedges, one in the middle, one in the northeast, and then one in the south. And then it created 4 Palestinian wedges, one that was about twice the size of the Gaza Strip, where the Gaza Strip is like the remnant of it, one that was probably about 1 1/3 times the size of the West Bank, where the West Bank is, and then one in the northwest. So, like Bethlehem was supposed to be in the West Bank, and then Haifa was supposed to be Palestinian. And by the time the Israelis were done, they had shrunk the West Bank, they had dramatically shrunk the Gaza Strip, and they just took the remaining piece. There were 4 pieces because Jaffa was going to become a little enclave in Palestine that was completely surrounded by Israel and the sea. And then Jerusalem was going to be a neutral zone, and it was going to be administered by the United Nations. That was the plan. And the Israelis, of course, broke the whole thing. Old Jerusalem or East Jerusalem ended up in Jordan. West Jerusalem ended up in Israel. And the Israelis, during the conquest, committed some acts of terrorism. So there's a place called Deir Yassin where they conduct a massacre. And the hope was to cause panic in the Palestinian population, to cause them to run away. And they did. A huge portion of the Palestinian population flees, fearing that Deir Yassin was just the beginning of a series of massacres. One of the catastrophic ironies of all of this is Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial, is across the valley from Deir Yassin. So it's almost like there's the commemoration of a terrible, cruel injustice across the valley from a terrible, cruel injustice. Instead of the world creating more justice, it heaped more suffering on a population of people that had nothing to do with the initial suffering.
Israel is under intense global criticism like never before. The whole world is watching, and the tide seems to be turning against Israel. It started with stern warnings from North Korea and the United Kingdom, and now powerful voices from France and Germany have joined the chorus. France made it crystal clear, if Israel continues to block aid from reaching Gaza, they're prepared to impose sanctions. The pressure is real, and France isn't holding back. In fact, they're even discussing officially recognizing Palestine as a state, a move once considered too controversial. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't shy away from saying that recognizing Palestine is no longer taboo. Germany echoed this sentiment loudly. They said the suffering of Gaza's civilians can't be ignored any longer. Violations of international law, they won't stand for it. Germany even hinted that they might reconsider their arms exports to Israel if the situation doesn't improve. This isn't just political talk. It's a sign that change might finally be on the horizon for Palestinians. The world's biggest players are speaking out, and the message is clear. Enough is enough. For Palestinians, it's simple. All we want is peace on our land. Peace, justice, and a future without fear.
There's a bit of a MAGA rebellion against Israel. So Thomas Massie tweeted out a couple of days ago that nothing justifies the tens of thousands of civilians that Israel has massacred in Gaza. And he said we should end all funding to Israel immediately. Marjorie Taylor Greene came on our show, The Young Turks. You can check that out on YouTube, 6 o'clock Eastern every night. And she said we should end all funding to Israel. Obviously, Tucker Carlson believes that. Many other right-wing hosts believe that. They even had a bill that was going to be introduced in the House that would have said boycotting Israel will lead to the United States government punishing you, including American citizens. And Marjorie Taylor Greene and MAGA led a rebellion against that and killed that bill. So they're losing the right wing. They're killing way too many people and taking way too much money from us doing it. So that rebellion is real, and I welcome it.
I've called it a genocide. Other people have different thoughts about it, and that's fine. We're seeing all these videos of people like picking up pieces of their children and like, it's the sickest thing I think it's ever been televised, basically, if you consider watching something on your phone being televised. It feels like a massacre. But I think where it gets scary is that we're complicit in it because we help fund like military stuff, you know, and that's where as like a regular guy, you're like, well, I'm paying these taxes and they're going towards this. Like sometimes it feels like we look out for the interests of Israel before we look out for the interests of America.
Our enemies. Because they are
the children are your enemies?
They are our enemies. Israel, until now, has more protection of human life and children in Gaza than ever.
These children are dying of hunger because you have not been allowing aid in. This is extreme.
They are not dying of hunger, and in any conflict that England was involved in the past, in this kind of environments, there were more innocent civilians killed and suffering hunger and everything else.
Mr. Smotrich, your leader, has said that the people of Gaza should leave, that the aim is to get them to leave.
It's a combat zone. When there is a combat zone, when there is a terrorist organization who is hiding behind civilians, you should let them run away. And if you are blocking them, you're aiding and abetting a terrorist organization, using them as human shields. That's not a moral thing to do. And if the United Kingdom want to be a humanitarian country that cares about human rights and human lives, they would help the Gazans who wants to leave the area, who leave and not aid Hamas to use them as human shields.
I've got an idea. Why don't you let them come over the border into Israel? Why don't they flee into
Israel? Because they are our enemies. Because they are
the children
our enemies.
Are your enemies?
They are our enemies, and according to international treaties about refugees in the time of war, you don't let them conquer your country with refugees.
There's only one country in the world that has used pornography as a weapon of war against children. Can you guess which one it is? If you said Israel, you're right. A lot of sick things that Israel has done, but this one's definitely at the top of my list. Back in 2002, Israel occupied 3 Palestinian TV stations in the West Bank and took over their broadcasting. The first thing they did is broadcast hardcore pornography across the West Bank to mess with young kids' heads. This is well documented, and there was also a New York Times article that validated this at the time. Here's the New York Times article. It was on March 31st, 2002, and it was called Operation Defensive Shield. Palestinians accused Israeli forces of capturing a television station and using it to broadcast pornography. United States consulate employee who was there confirmed that the pornography was being played on air. Obviously, Israel wouldn't own up to that, so you know what they responded? Israeli army said soldiers interrupted the station's broadcasting but had not substituted pornography for the usual programming. U.S. consulate employee confirmed that pornography was being played. The IDF confirmed that they did occupy the TV station, and they confirmed that they did stop the broadcasting. Logically, who else did it? You think a Muslim did it? I am furious. These are people who are pew-pewing at us, and they are also playing this disgusting trick on us. It's not healthy. I think the Israelis want to mess with our young men's heads. I have 6 children at home. They have nowhere to go. What is going on here? They can't even watch TV.
How can any sane, rational person doubt?
Are we seeing a turning point for Israel's allies?
I see rats jumping off a sinking ship. What's happened in Gaza, not especially, but for the international media and for world leaders, the brutal starvation imposed on Gaza since early March until today, and all the embarrassing scenes that ensued, all the very realistic fears that Gaza was experiencing a starvation now bordering on famine, it's become such an embarrassment that some of the rats, like the British Foreign Secretary Lamy and the Nazi princess Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission, after supporting all of Israel's actions, are now trying to distance themselves. Whether or not that will translate into action, I can't say. I see no point in speculating about. I think the most important thing at this point is to establish clearly what happened and what is happening. And it should be borne in mind by every one of your listeners, because Israel has a citizen army. The army is representative of the Israeli population. Half of that population supports genocide. That means 1 of every 2 Israeli soldiers in Gaza supports genocide. 1 of every 2 commanders in Gaza supports genocide. 1 of every 2 members of the Israeli government supports genocide. In the face of that fact, allow me, in the face of that fact on the one side, and there has been no punishment of any of those soldiers and commanders committing genocide on the other hand, between those 2 facts, how can any sane, rational person doubt that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza?
I mean, if we're talking geopolitically, then frankly, Israel is not fighting Hamas. They're fighting reality. You can't really win in that fight. I mean, I can recap basically what I've always said is inevitably going to happen in the Middle East with regards to the Israel-Palestine situation. I've been saying this for a long time. And the more time passes, the fewer people disagree with me. You know, I got a lot of hate at the beginning when I first said this. But that's the thing about being right. People like to take the right position once it becomes obvious that it is the right position. There's really only one way that this can go. There's only one way it can go, and that's de-Zionization of Israel. And their integration into the region. Their decoupling from America and basically a transfer of their dependency to the Gulf. Israel will be absorbed into the corridor of influence along the Mediterranean that's controlled by the GCC and Turkey. The Palestinian territories will eventually be integrated into what is now Israel in line with a sort of the one-state solution, where the Palestinians are going to eventually be the majority with full citizenship rights, and the whole country is going to be part of that soft empire, that regional collective sovereignty being created by the Gulf states and by Turkey. So there will be an end of the conflict. There will be the elimination of all militancy, the establishment of stability through regional investment and development alongside the A National OCGFC and their investment in development and so on. That's the only way that this can go. And predictably, the elements in Israel who stand to lose the most from this, the Netanyahus, the Ben-Gvirs, and so on, you know, the ideological fanatics, the racists, the genocidal maniacs, they're flailing against this. But they're just no match. They're simply no match for the powers that are driving this transition. What we're witnessing right now in Israel is not Israel pursuing any sort of strategy. It's Israel literally running out of options. It isn't escalation as leverage, it's escalation as habit. You know, the violence in Gaza is no longer about deterrence or control or even security. They can't even make that claim. It's a ritual of dominance that no longer delivers results. It's a compulsion with no rational payoff. They're not advancing any cause by what they're doing. They're broadcasting their irrelevance, and the more irrelevant they become, the more desperate they become. This isn't speculation. The A National Financial Elite, the OCGFC, the A National OCGFC, have already recalibrated. They have moved on to advocacy for stability and for infrastructure and integration and development. And Israel, with every missile strike, with every war crime, they're making it harder for them to justify Israel's inclusion in that future. The GCC sees this, BRICS sees this, even the West is beginning to understand that Israel has become a geopolitical liability. So why does Israel continue at all? Well, because the system that created Zionism never included an off switch. It was designed to expand until there was nothing left to take. And when expansion becomes impossible, they can't adapt. They just panic. So what you're seeing now is panic. It's panic, not power. It's not strategic maneuvering on the part of Israel. It's literally their disintegration under the pressure of historical redundancy. The idea that they could empty Gaza of Palestinians, that they could actually erase a people and still walk through the corridors of global legitimacy is absolutely delusional. The world's no longer willing to pretend. Egypt is not going to open the gates. Jordan is not going to comply. No one is going to legalize ethnic cleansing just to make room for Israel's fantasy of demographic supremacy. They don't have the capital, political or financial, to try to force anyone, not anymore. The economic elite who once backed Israel for regional leverage now see greater returns in de-risking the region, not destabilizing the region, de-risking the region. The GCC states are building a future for themselves and for the whole region, and they can't afford to mortgage all of that on a client that no longer follows instructions. I'm talking about Israel. BRICS isn't beholden to Tel Aviv. The OCGFC are restructuring the whole global system, and Israel is rapidly being priced out of relevance. The genocide is not helping them, it's isolating them. It's not strengthening their state, it's hollowing their state out, which just makes them more vulnerable and more susceptible for domination. And the longer this continues, the more irreversible the fallout becomes. They should be able to see it, but they're too ideologically blind, because Zionism doesn't do moderation. It can't pivot to diplomacy or recalibrate its methods. It's a binary system. Conquer or collapse. And now that it can't actually conquer, it defaults to collapse. This isn't the end of Gaza. It's the end of Zionist strategy. It has become morally indefensible. It has become economically unviable. It has become diplomatically corrosive and strategically incoherent. It no longer makes any sense in the world. The world has stopped pretending that it does make any sense. This genocide is not going to save Israel. It's not going to protect their security or revive their legitimacy. Quite the opposite. This is only going to mark the final chapter in a doctrine that mistook brutality for authority. But power and authority is much more complex than that. And I don't think anyone in the region has actually understood this better than the GCC. I don't think you understand how much the GCC has been doing just over the last several weeks. Honestly, if you're not aware of this, then you won't have anywhere near an accurate understanding of what's actually happening in the world. But you know, a lot of people, especially even among Muslims, they have either an obsolete understanding of global politics, or they have an insurmountable bias against the Gulf, or else they just can't fathom Muslim countries actually operating with power and autonomy. Like they have such a colonized mind themselves that they imagine only the West can do anything, and our countries are only ever going to be Western lackeys. So they'll actually like literally block out reality just to preserve this programming. But look, the GCC countries have been on an absolute tear recently. Diplomatically, economically, strategically. It's really quite remarkable. And if you're missing out on it, you're really missing out on pivotal events. You know, just this month in Kuala Lumpur, for example. That meeting wasn't symbolic, it was foundational, as in they're building a foundation. Meanwhile, you've got people who don't even know that building is going on. But a whole architecture, political, economic, diplomatic infrastructure is being built right now across the global south, which is going to serve as the foundation for the whole second half of the 21st century. While Western powers are tangled in their own decline, you know, with conflicts, tariffs, debt ceilings, protests, inflation, what have you, the GCC is coordinating inter-regional integration on an unprecedented scale. Like I said, you had that the second annual ASEAN GCC summit in Kuala Lumpur. It was the first ever ASEAN China GCC trilateral summit. Closed door meetings, energy deals, currency frameworks, digital economic pipelines. This is the global south unifying into function. You know, you had Indonesia announcing their alignment with the Saudi peace plan, which is basically the official position of BRICS regarding Israel-Palestine, i.e., normalization with Israel, Indonesia agreeing to normalization with Israel on the condition of Palestinian statehood. And the Saudis have been going across Europe, lining up support for this, lining up support for recognition of a Palestinian state. Spain just recognized Palestine and halted all arms to Israel, banned all ships carrying arms to Israel from docking in Spanish ports. And they made that announcement not just 2 weeks after signing massive investment deals with Saudi Arabia. You think that's a coincidence? No. That's what power looks like when it's played smart, when you use your power correctly. That's investment diplomacy. That's transactional sovereignty building. You know, the GCC recognized that in a Western-dominated world order, money is actually the only thing that counts. The rules of the game are actually incredibly simple when it's that game. And you can't win that game except according to the rules of that game. And the Gulf states have all the resources necessary to do that, and that's what they are doing. I mean, let's be clear. The EU has been deeply divided. 15 out of 27 members still don't recognize Palestine. But now, you've got 1.6 billion euros coming from the EU to the Palestinian Authority. France is ready to join the recognition wave by summer 2025. A joint UN conference that's going to be co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France in June. That doesn't happen because of inflammatory emotional rhetoric. That happens because of economic leverage being used wisely, strategically, and cunningly. And the leverage that they have is energy, capital, and access, controlled all by the Gulf. What the GCC is doing is incredibly strategic. They're playing the game extremely well. You know, they sign a deal, they frame the political demand, they co-host the diplomatic theater that everyone needs, and they redirect legal and humanitarian legitimacy back towards Palestine. You know, you might see the headline, France may recognize Palestine, but behind that, there's Saudi investment, there's UAE financing, there's Qatari mediation. This isn't appeasement, this is realignment. They are forcing a realignment on the West. They're not begging the West, they're buying it. That's what the West always did. They always used money to shape policy, but it was policy only for their interests. But now the GCC is doing it better. Palestinian statehood is being packaged inside of investment portfolios. And the West is accepting the terms because they have to. They have no alternative. So to all of the doubters who have always been asking, you know, what's the GCC doing for Palestine? Wake up. This isn't Twitter activism. This is systems level influence. They're rewriting Europe's position one contract at a time. You can't force Europe to act morally. You can't shame them into morality. You can only make immorality too expensive, or anyway, make it less profitable than morality. And you can reward decency with deals. The GCC has figured this out. And now they're exporting justice, the only way that Europe understands, through economic pressure and through economic opportunity. You're watching, if you understand what you're watching the end of the G7 era in real time. Because while America is sanctioning, for example, the GCC is constructing, you know, local currency cooperation, that's de-dollarization in real time. Regional business councils being set up, that's parallel economic governance mechanisms being set up in real time. Food and energy security, that's mutual dependence without imperial extraction. That's collective sovereignty. This isn't diplomacy, this is architecture that they're building. You understand? That's strategic, long game, systemic architecture that they're building. A multipolar financial system, local currencies, fintech, digital payment rails, no IMF, no dollar, no approval needed from Washington. That's what the future looks like. A development corridor from the Arabian Peninsula through Southeast Asia to China. Gulf capital, ASEAN markets, Chinese infrastructure. In other words, a new world system with the West on the outside. They're building a behemoth while you still think Israel has power. I'm sorry, but that's patently absurd. Israel is deteriorating before our eyes. They're building nothing. They're depleting any power that they ever had by the hour. The GCC discussed Gaza at that multilateral summit with ASEAN and China, and that wasn't just virtue signaling. That was a repositioning and a fortification and consolidation of the Palestinian issue into the mainstream of the Global South agenda, where Israel has no control over how that's framed or has no control over the outcome. That's strategic reframing. That's how sovereignty is protected in the 21st century, not by slogans, but by systems. And that's what they're building, systems. You want slogans. You want fiery rhetoric. But meanwhile, they're building infrastructure. They're building systems. They're building architecture. You know, if you're still expecting the future to come from the West, you're facing in the wrong direction. Nothing is happening in the West. The future is being written from the South and from the East, and the Gulf, whether you like it or not, is one of the authors. The GCC isn't just oil anymore. It's not just finance. It's coordination, infrastructure, diplomacy, and control of narrative. If you're not paying attention, you're going to wake up one day realizing that you missed the whole transition. You missed the whole transition completely while you were denigrating and insulting and dismissing the very people who have been driving the transition. So you should take this seriously and you should pay attention. You should pay attention to what the Gulf is doing, but most of you probably don't even know. This is the global pivot. Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah, the Muslim world is right at the center of it.